And we're live. Welcome to the Experiencer Group Roundtable. I'm your co-host, Jay Christopher King, here with
Kirsten Blackburn. It's great to see you guys.
It's great to see you too. And it's great to see folks in the chat. And we've got a great episode today. Kirsten, it's our 150th event with the Experiencer Group. Can you believe that?
I can.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah, I can. And at the same time, I feel like we just started doing this, and it feels like, in a way, like our 20th event. I mean, it's been so much fun and such a delightful experience.
Yeah, and it's been wonderful to see how things have been evolving. For those that don't know, we started the Experiencer Group with our co-founder Stuart Davis in February of last year. So that's a little bit of context for how many events we've been able to put into 100. How much time and 150 events. So yeah,
well,
we've got a
great deal of those events are just exclusive for our members. So actually 100%. The majority of them. So yeah, so that's one of the pluses of being a member of the Experiencer Group.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's only maybe our 7th or 8th, something like that, public event, and of course we're going to be having more of those. So today we have a great guest, Dr. Esbjörn-Hargens, and what we're going to do is we're going to do about 50 minutes of live streaming here, and then we're going to take about a 5-minute break, and we're going to move over to doing a private members Ask Me Anything with Sean on the Experiencer Group site, and have kind of a more intimate conversation over there. So that'll be exciting. I'm looking forward to trying this format out. I think it'll be fun.
Yeah, me too.
So cool. So with that, Dr. Sean Esbjörn-Hargens is an academic pioneer in the realm of what he terms Exo Studies, a broad network of disciplines related to psi phenomena, ufology, and anomalous experiences of all kinds. He's Dean of Integral Education, Integral Health Program Director, and Integral Noetic Sciences Program Director at the California Institute for Human Science. Notably, he runs a new Noetic Sciences PhD program with a concentration in anomalous studies. In 2004, Sean founded and served for 9 years as executive editor of the Journal of Integral Theory and Practice, an academic peer-reviewed journal. In this role, he published 4,000 pages of material from over 100 authors. Between 2006 and 2011, he created and served as chair of a number of new graduate, master's, and certificate programs at several universities, including John F. Kennedy University and Fielding Graduate University. Sean is the founding editor of the SUNY series in Integral Theory. Since 2008, 12 volumes have been published in that series. He's also authored or edited 8 books, including Integral Ecology, co-authored with Michael Zimmerman, Meta-Theory for the 21st Century, co-edited with Roy Bhaskar and others, and Dancing with Sophia, which he co-edited with Michael Schwartz. He's currently co-editing 2 anthologies on integrative meta-theory for Routledge Press. Sean, it is great to have you here on the show today.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Congratulations. 150 episodes. Amazing. I remember when the Experiencer Group was just a twinkle in all 3 of your eyes. So it's really awesome to be here on such a cool, 150th episode.
I can't think of a better person to have on for this day in terms of bringing together all the different forms of anomalous experience and anomalous study, and really, really considering them and trying to push the ball forward with this. You do such a great job of that.
Thanks, Jay. Great. So let's dive in. Where do you want to start?
Gosh, let's see. Well, I mean, we've known each other for a few years now, but for the audience out there, were you interested in the paranormal and ufology as a kid? What got you really hooked into anomalous studies?
Yeah, I was. I definitely read, my fair share of UFO and Bigfoot books and ghost story books, but I don't think more so than kind of the average curious youngster. So it was an interest. I did explore it. As an adult, I was going to an event with the Dalai Lama, and I was recently married and with my wife of 20 years now. And just to give you a sense, this was about maybe 18 years ago. And we were in Arizona in Tucson, and I was in this used bookstore. I'm a big bibliophile. Like, went on a trip to Italy last week and spent $1,000 on books. We had to buy a new suitcase to bring everything. So like, it was
That's amazing.
yeah, so definitely an issue I'm working on. And so I was in this used bookstore, and there was, classic, Strieber's, communion book. I've seen it for years, but that cover is so striking, and I'm just like, okay, I'm finally going to read this book. So I pick it up, I gobble it, and then I basically read 7 other books by Strieber. Just couldn't stop. And it was kind of curious to me because I don't often go like on a reading binge like that. Like I'll read 1 or 2 books and something, and I'll move to something else. So it definitely was kind of activating something for me. And then I kind of moved on after, kind of devouring all of that, and, was just doing my, normal, crazy, integral, academic stuff. And then my first child was born, Tatiana, and we named her Tatiana, which is Queen of the Fairies, because I've always felt connected to nature spirits and the elemental world. And when she was born, it kind of disrupted my wife and mine's kind of spiritual life, right? We were involved with Tibetan Buddhism. We were involved with an approach called the Diamond Heart approach. And so we were going to regular retreats, and, like week-long retreats, once or twice a year, lots of weekend retreats. Well, once little Tati was in the mix, we drug her to some of these events, but it ended up not being very practical or sustainable to take, a little baby to all these meditation retreats. And honestly, the boomer Buddhists got really pissed off and were like not happy that we had our kid with us. And I was like, oh my God, like you are so not a Buddhist, like to get by this. So anyway, so I had this kind of structured practice life that just evaporated. And in that kind of spiritual void of like, oh my God, like, what do I do with my desire for the divine? Like, how do I engage this? Because this having a little kid is not conducive to meditating. I mean, it's its own form of meditation, right? So in this space, I noticed that I was having a real soul impulse towards really going into what I would call and others call the fairy traditions, so working with the intelligences of the natural world, the subtle realms that connect with the ecology. And I just thought, all right, I'm going to go into this space. I'm going to dive in. I'm going to give it 10 years, and I'm just going to see what happens. I'm just going to kind of suspend my judgment around, is this real or not real, right? So it was kind of my initial, ontological flooding practice of just going, okay, I'm just going to open up to the possibility of these realities. And because it always been kind of a soul impulse, so like I had a disposition towards it, but I didn't really have a lot of experiential anchoring in that space. And so as I started diving into all of that, I started having experiences. I started, having more anomalous kinds of encounters. And then I started having more galactic experiences and connecting with beings that were, as far as I could tell, were clearly not fairy in origin. And so this was very confusing. And as I kind of tried to make sense of that, I ended up, at some point in that process, talking with Stuart Davis and talking with others, and eventually just thought, I want to create Exo Studies so that we can bring together the insights from so many different traditions to understand anomalous experiences and the range of non-human intelligences that we're interacting with. And so I launched the Exo Studies Institute, and then which ended up being the year-long course that Jay did and others have done. And then kind of in that context, because I'm kind of an integral business person on the one hand and an integral academic on the other hand, I was like, I need to create a master's and PhD program that deals with these topics so that others who want to be leaders, thought leaders in helping to develop the frameworks and the clinical methods and, just kind of the theoretical, and clinical, foundations for supporting experiencers. I was like, okay, that seems to be something that wants to happen, and I want to be part of that. So then I just recently got the final approval a few months ago and have launched this new, master's and PhD program in this space.
That is so wonderful. And, it's so great to hear you talk about all of this stuff that's kind of, coming together. And I have to say that, you have been such a, force behind a lot of how we handle things in the experiencer group. I mean,
Wow.
for one thing, you have this ability, and you're sort of pioneering along with like people like Jeff Kripal, and you're sort of bringing in this sort of ability to look at everything and put it together and not separate out, the Bigfoot people from the fairy people, from the UFO people who always traditionally just kind of hated each other.
Right. Totally.
So,
Oh my gosh.
so yeah, exactly. And so one of the things that we often, refer to is your quote of take this seriously but hold it lightly. And this is something that we just kind of use as a mantra in the
Mm.
experiencer group.
Oh, that's so great to hear. Yeah, thanks, Kirsten, for reflecting that back. And yeah, I mean, ultimately, I'm interested in the nature of reality, and I just find all these different kinds of experiences are little windows, little glimpses into different aspects of it. And one of the things that starts to emerge when you start really listening to experiencers who have had this wide range of experiences, you start to realize that there's certain patterns and certain themes, and that all of these anomalous experiences are connected in some interesting ways. And I just got so curious about like, what is that connective tissue? Like, how is it, people have these kinds of very different experiences, and yet at the same time, some experiencers have all these experiences, right? So I just was really intrigued by, why do some people only see fairies, and other people only see ghosts, and other people only see Bigfoot, and other people only see extraterrestrials? And then there's some people who see all of those types of beings. So what is it about our subtle bodies, our subtle senses, that enable us to see certain types of phenomenon and have certain kinds of extraordinary experiences? And then what's going on with the individuals who seem to have perceptions across that landscape of wild and weirdness? And so that's one of my big passions, experientially and academically, is to try and better understand that. Because I think they're all cracks in the scientific materialistic worldview, right? And all of those different experiences are letting important light in. And, so let's just, blow up the scientific materialistic worldview and get on with a multidimensional, multiverse cosmology, so that we can just, really make room for the wide range of experiences that, people are having. And the thing is the more I kind of came out of the UFO ET closet and started talking about these things, I just discovered how ubiquitous experiences are in these realms. Like, so many experiencers, like it continues to blow me away that there's so many folks out there who have had some of these experiences at different points in their life or ongoingly. I just had a conversation with a dissertation student who I've been working with for, kind of off and on over the last year. And then today she was sharing more about, because she saw my interview with Jeff Mishplove on non-human intelligences that recently posted, and she was sharing more with me about her anomalous experiences. And so I was learning these new details about her own anomalous experiences as a result of her seeing me come out and talk more openly about it myself. And so this is why I love what you all are doing with the experiencer group, because we just need these forums and contexts where more of us can get together and compare notes.
Absolutely. And I can imagine, as I always do, like, that there are people in the chat, or that maybe looking at this in the future, and they're coming to this stream, maybe having a more ufological or a traditional, maybe they've seen a ghost or something like that. But one of the really taboo areas, even within the anomalous, is often like fairy culture and
Right.
the study of fairies, right? And I'm sure that some people just, it's like they hear that and their brain freezes, you know what I mean? And it's so funny that even you can be so deep within this culture and still have that kind of brain freeze, right?
Yeah.
But just last week, Sean Rosh and I on Witness Citizen, we were talking to James Tunney, who of course is quite well versed in the realm of of fairy lore, among many other things. That guy could talk for 3 hours about a vacuum cleaner. I think he could talk about Francis Bacon. He could talk about anything. I love him on Jeffrey Mishlove, and I loved your show on Jeffrey Mishlove's
Yes, that was
show as
amazing.
well. It was incredible. But you know, when we're talking about, first of all, when we're talking about fairy lore, and first of all, you know, when we're looking at the history of fairy lore, we're looking at the a longer form history of anomalous experience. You know, and a lot of these situations, when we're looking at Evans Wentz, when we're looking at Yates, when we're looking at these very notable situations of fairy lore, we're really looking at a record of earlier history dealing with and describing to the best that they could these kinds of non-human entity encounters, right? And for lack of a better term, and why not use an enduring term, when we're talking about fairy culture or the fae, basically we're just talking about non-human entities that in some way view Earth as their home, in like in a way. Does that sound correct?
Absolutely.
Overall?
Yeah. You know, and it's interesting because you're so right. Like I did a talk once with a colleague, Terry Patton, and we titled it something like Fairies, Angels, Aliens, Oh My, right? Because it's like the angel folks don't want to talk about the ETs. ET folks don't want to talk about the fairies. The fairy folks don't want to talk about the angel, right? Because they're all kind of afraid that their group of non-human intelligence is somehow going to be confused or reduced to this other category, right? And so it's just this interesting anomalous snobbery. And, you know, I obviously, you know, Jacques Vallée's book, Passport to Magnolia, was groundbreaking in helping people realize that there's maybe a deeper set of connections between, you know, the fairy lore and ET contact. That said, you know, I'm in the process of writing a chapter that, you know, one gives Jacques a big hug for the work he did, but then like just kind of totally critiques and expands the conversation beyond what he's done there, because it's a lot more complex than, you know, that, because a lot of people will tend to reduce, you know, ET contact to, those are just fairies, or no, fairies are just, you know, was ET contact of yesteryear that's being, you know, filtered through a cultural lens that, you know, made room for fairies but didn't understand ETs, right? You know, I did a presentation at Esalen event, you know, in December, and I had like 5 slides of all these bullet points getting into this topic of, you know, fairies versus ETs and angels, and how complex it is, because you have some fairies that look like ETs, you have some ETs that look like fairies, you have fairies that are on other planets, you have some fairy beings that are actually spacefaring, right, and galactic, and like it's just like oh my god, it's so crazy making. But then, like, how do you talk about any of this with your average, you know, well-educated adult? You know, it's just like, you know, it's like where to begin, because it just sounds so outlandish, and it is in the best sense.
One of the things that I love best about that, and I just want to make one more comment in the response, and we'll go on to Kirsten, that I think is important, is, again, going back to what Kirsten was talking about earlier, your common phrase of taking it seriously and holding it lightly, you know. And I think that in what you were just saying, that it really points to what is such an important part of why you're an integral component of anomalous studies and the conversation these days, because, you know, you bring in, you know, there's terms like ontological flooding or bracketing. And we try to shy away in some ways with specialized language because it can be difficult for people to keep up in conversations. And at the same time, you know, there's an element where we need more specific language to be talking about these things with any kind of specificity. Would you tend to agree with that?
Yeah, no, and this is kind of one of my main motivations for, you know, developing the kind of academic, you know, space, and, you know, in the form of the master's and PhD program, you know, because we need to be able to have a more sophisticated conversation about these realities, these experiences. So we need new distinctions, we need new frameworks, we need new terms and concepts. So there is kind of, you know, and it can lend itself to jargon, and that can be a barrier. And so that is an issue you have to keep in mind. But at the same time, we need a way to talk about it. And the simplistic way we're currently talking about it is not serving us. right? And so I'm interested in, like, what's the kind of grounded experiential frameworks that we can develop that allow us to compare notes and understand these realities in a much deeper way. And in Jeff Kripal's program, the GEM program, Gnosticism, Esotericism, Mysticism, is doing that in a kind of religious studies humanities context. The program I'm doing in integral noetic sciences is doing that in kind of the science of consciousness context, which includes humanities and religious studies, but it also brings in more of a scientific approach, right? Both qualitative and quantitative research to try and understand, how can we better talk about this? Because, and I think, this is why I'm excited about this program, is I think it's an indication of things are shifting, right? Like the whole topic of UFOs, as we know over the last few years, has exploded into the mainstream and continues to do so. There's, with the medicalization of psychedelics, or even the, John Hopkins, last year or so did a study on the DMT entities and whether or not they are real entities, right? So there's a way in which our mainstream culture is opening up to, anomalous experiences. And I think parallel to that process, we need, academic programs that are helping to research and explore these phenomena and realities and giving us new ways to understand them and talk about them.
Mm-hmm. That's so great. And, as you probably know, we went to the Archives of the Impossible event, which was so fabulous at Rice University. And to be able to actually go to the library and read Whitley Strieber's, the letters that came to him and his wife, Anne, that just felt amazing. And it felt very revolutionary, too. And I agree with you that, with you both, that we need to kind of develop a new language. It works with UFO to UAP.
Right.
Although I have to say, I have a certain irritation with that because I feel like we're rebranding something that's been around forever.
Yeah.
But when it comes to fairies and fairy lore, which I was absorbed in as a teenager because I grew up on Orcas Island. And I spent a huge amount of time as a teenager with the Theosophical Society on Orcas Island and with Dora Coons, who was one of my, role models and mentors who taught me therapeutic touch and worked with my family. She wrote the book, The Real World of Fairies. Which was written quite a long time ago and is an amazing resource.
Yeah, no, I have that book. I might even have 2 copies of it. I love the nature intelligences and the elementals and the fairy beings, and it's the Theosophical tradition has done such a great job of engaging, and I'm always disappointed that there's not kind of a better introduction to the Theosophical cosmology. Like I just haven't found a good book that does that well. But yeah, it's, and I think this is why I wrote Our Wild Cosmos. It's like we live in a highly populated cosmos with all kinds of different intelligences, and and there's these categories that I introduced in that paper, of the Fae, the Celestials, and the Galactics. And I think that's an example of a simple framework, and a lot of other authors have used some variation of that. That kind of helps us, get to a certain point in the conversation. But then at a certain point, those categories are even problematic, right? They need even more sophisticated and nuanced ways of talking and thinking about this. It's so great to hear that you have your own deep connection to the fairy traditions, Kirsten.
Oh, it was part of our daily life. I spent time with children who were seeing fairies and fae and elementals. We practiced in the art of trying to see the elementals. We were surrounded by clairvoyants who would point out. They would say things like, "There's a diva," which was the term in the Theosophical Society at the time for an angel. Which I love that term because we have turned the word angel into something so much more culturally accepted. But they would point and say, "There's a diva standing right there." It was just part of our life.
Wow, amazing.
Very cool.
And speaking along those lines, in terms of kind of being in a community where anomalous experiences accepted or not accepted, or kind of the barriers or the boundaries between those. A number of years ago, you came out of the closet as an experiencer yourself, as you kind of referenced earlier, as a teacher, an academic, and as a person that already had a wide network of people around you.
Yeah.
How was that process of deciding to come forward? Was there trepidation? What were the considerations for you, and what really motivated you to come forward like that?
Yeah, I was nervous about it. It was actually in my conversations with Stuart that really kind of served as the catalyst for me saying, okay, I'm going to do this. I think because my primary income is through consulting, business consulting, and working with progressive mainstream companies. So of course the fear was, if I go this route, if I'm more visible in this domain, my clients are going to Google my name, and then they're going to see that I'm doing, stuff in this area, and they're going to just be like, no, thanks. So I was really worried about it impacting kind of my livelihood and my family. Like, I kind of felt like if it was just me, no big deal. But it's like when you have two young girls and, and you're just like, okay, like I need to factor that in here. But I also just felt this soul impulse, I was just really tuning into that. And I think, I was having guidance. And then I was having these experiences, right? I was just like, okay, these experiences are happening, and so I can either talk about them or share them or make valid space for them, or I can ignore it. And I didn't want to ignore it. And so I just like, at a certain point, it's just like, okay, I'm just jumping off the cliff, and I'll just let the cards fall where they may, and I'll just trust the unfolding. In the diamond approach, which is one of the traditions I've worked with a lot, there's this concept of basic trust, capital B, capital T. And essentially what basic trust is, it's trusting the intelligence of the unfolding now, capital N, right? And so it's about getting out of your egoic view of what should happen or what you want to happen or what you think is happening. And it's really just kind of surrendering to what's unfolding in your life and trusting that, even if it's taking you in a direction that otherwise you wouldn't want to go in. And so it was, having worked with that concept experientially for many years, I was like, okay, here's an opportunity for basic trust. I'm just going to release and surrender into this train is leaving the station, right? And so I'm going to stay on it, and we're going to see where it goes. And then later, after I kind of came out, I found it actually increased my business. Like, more and more clients were like saying, hey, that, topic, I've actually had some experiences, or I've always been interested in that. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I was not expecting this. Right. So, it's been fascinating and validating to go, okay, like, it's all good. It's like, and sure, maybe there will be some moments down the road where I feel the pinch a bit more. But at this point, several years into it, I have no regrets. And I think the other thing too is I see how by me coming out and being more visible and vocal about it, it's allowing other people to, move forward in their path of making sense of their own experiences. And honestly, it's just like, I feel so touched and so grateful to be serving in that role, just as the two of you have, your own experience of that and holding the experiencer group space. Like, it's so priceless to support people in their own inquiry around all of this.
Thank you. Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. And, that brings me to a question I've been wanting to ask you. And that is, as a child, did you ever have any experiences that now you look back on and kind of think to yourself, oh, this was anomalous? And do your family members, because this kind of thing runs in families, as we know, we find out all the time. Do your family members have any kind of family lore about something like that may have been misconstrued, or I shouldn't say misconstrued, construed as either spiritual or something else?
Yeah, interestingly, no to both questions. Though I'll add a little bit. I sometimes joke that I'm a micro experiencer, in that, like, I've had like a little experience of most things, right? Like I've seen one ghost, I've had a couple powerful clairvoyant experiences, I've had a couple precognitive experiences. I've had a couple celestial archangel experiences. So, but it's like I'm not like this mega experiencer, but I've had enough of these experiences, where I'm just like, okay, something's going on here. like there's this other world. In some of my past life regression stuff and some of the people I've worked with, they have suggested and indicated that there was stuff going on when I was young, right? And that I was having contact when I was young, with ETs in particular. I don't yet have a conscious recall of that, right? And so it's one of those things where I take it seriously, but I hold it lightly. Like other people are checking in with my soul stream and they're suggesting that there's some of that in my background. I don't yet have access to that. So I just kind of remain open to that possibility. A few years ago, my mom, after I've been involved with transpersonal psychology and, mystical experiences and meditation for, 20 plus years now. And like, I don't know, after like 10 years ago, so I'd been in this for like 10 years, my mom just out of the blue says, yeah, I have lucid dreams almost every night. And I'm like, what? Like, and you've never said this? Like, hello, right? And so that is kind of a moment of there being like an indication of like, okay, there's, like why would my mom be having like a stabilized, realized capacity for regular lucid dreams? And then a few years ago, she lost it, just disappeared like overnight. And so I actually started talking with her about, reactivating that and seeing if she can kind of bring that capacity back into her conscious awareness. Right. So there is that kind of data point of, some, what's going on with my mom. Right. So there is some kind of lineage in that sense.
That is so cool. And that happens, right, Jay? Yeah. I mean, we see that a lot.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And it gets me thinking, and when we talk about kind of like the adapting sense of how we approach the nature of reality and what kind of hypotheses, we can throw out there. I think I know the answer to this question, but do you think that we have a decent grasp on the nature of reality? And B, along those lines, there are a lot of competing hypotheses about how our world overlaps with the paranormal, with the ufological, with anomalous studies in general. And it seems like people are finally getting over the idea that it all has to be one thing. Thank God. Yeah. Or thank whoever. Thank whoever. And you've done a paper called Our Wild Cosmos. You've done other work that kind of puts forward what you call the mutual enactment hypothesis, and that kind of brings together various other hypotheses as well. Can you talk about both of those things a little bit?
Yeah, and the other day I was reflecting on this a lot, and I was saying to myself, like, all the pieces are there. Like we do have access to a pretty comprehensive understanding of reality. Right. And part of the challenge is everyone has a piece, but it's all fragmented, right? All the different anomalous groups, as we were talking about earlier. But like, I feel like for myself, like just kind of engaging all these different literatures, talking with lots of experiencers, being in my own embodied process and experience of these phenomena, I feel like I'm at a point now where I feel like I have a good sense, I have a good understanding of the nature of reality. And I kind of think of it in terms of like the iPhone. The innovation of the iPhone was basically it took all this off the shelf technology that was around and available, and it put it together in a new way, right? And so on the one hand, it was nothing new, and on the other hand, the sum was greater than the parts. It was this total revolution in how we relate to the world, right? So I kind of see that with the status of our cosmology. We need a bigger multiverse cosmology, but we have all the components. We have all the pieces. If you look at the NDE literature, if you look at the ET literature, if you look at, the Bigfoot literature, if you look at, the cutting edge physics work, you look at, if you bring together, and this is why in Our Wild Cosmos, I list out like 150 disciplines, that one should consider engaging to help answer certain parts of these questions. I feel like we have all the pieces. The process now is kind of bringing them together and integrating them into what I think of a kind of an updated indigenous cosmology. Like, I think the indigenous cosmology's got a lot right. I think the theosophical cosmology got a lot right. I think like the Urantia, cosmology has a lot of interesting components. I think the law of one is pretty complete, right? So it's like when you start kind of bringing these different cosmological, even Seth, the Seth material is like amazing, right? So when you bring it all together, like there's a certain kind of, emergent cosmology, kind of an updated, integrated cosmology that I think covers 90% of how we can make sense of reality. So I think it's available. I think it's there. I don't think, it's that earth shattering. But like we're so fragmented and locked into our particular anomalous tribes that we are, competing at this level of trying to make sense of things. But I think when you go to the meta level, I think most of it's available and it's actually not too surprising.
And that reminds me that you have a 6-month course coming up, I believe. And so I'm really curious if you can tell everybody like how to find this course, how to sign up for it and stuff, because I have a feeling I've always been very envious of the Exo Studies kids, because I always feel like I'm like not part of the cool intelligentsia. And
that's the last thing we want.
I know. So I'm really hoping to take this course, and I wonder if you can give us details on how to find that and get into it.
Oh, and what's in there altogether too.
Yeah.
Right. So people can go to exostudies.org. It's .org or .com. Oh my gosh, I can't remember, but it's one of those. So Exo Studies, and it's basically a follow-up to the year-long course that that ended in December. And the year-long course, as many of you know, and Jay was part of that, is like we tackled 42 topics, spread out over a year. And each week I kind of summarized 3 to 5 books that I had read that were connected to a specific topic for that week. And so it was very theoretical, but a lot of people in the program brought their experiences. So in that sense, there was a lot of kind of grounding the theory with our own experiences. But I felt like at the end of that course, it's just like I really wanted to go into the embodied experience of this phenomena, and I wanted to engage in practices together. And so there's 3 main books that I'm using for the course, and it's a 6-month course, and people can kind of come and go as they're able to in terms of their busy lives, right? So it's not like there's an expectation you come to each of the live classes. We meet on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And 2 different time slots to kind of accommodate, the global community. And we're going to work with Kurt Leland's book, The Multidimensional Human, and he maps out, oh, there we go. Nice. Thanks, Jay. There's 20 plus practices in that book. And he basically, and there's simple meditations, and there's like 5 that deal with our kind of inner senses of experiencing ourself, 5 that deal with our kinesthetic senses of our bodies in these subtle realms. There's 5 that deal with navigating subtle environments. And then there's 5 practices that deal with interacting with non-human intelligences. So it's a really powerful integrative model of cultivating different types of subtle senses that help you deal with inner experiences, interacting with other beings, being in different kinds of subtle spaces. And so we're going to be doing that. And then we are also going to be exploring our 9 subtle bodies. There's another book about awakening the 9 bodies, these subtle bodies, because it's my understanding that, in my experience, that we have these different subtle bodies, and different subtle bodies have different subtle senses, right? And this is part of what accounts for why 3 people might have a multi-witness encounter of a UFO or ET event, but then have very different experiences of what happened, right? Some might have a clairvoyant aspect of the experience, another have a clairsentient aspect of the experience, another a clairaudient, audio experience, right? And so I'm very interested in like, what is the esoteric anatomy of our subtle bodies? And then how does that interact with different types of subtle senses? And then how does that allow us to experience different subtle worlds and different subtle beings? And so this gets into the heart of what you were asking about, Jay, with the mutual enactment hypothesis, which I often kind of jokingly refer to as they're bringing something to the party and we're bringing something to the party, right? And the party is the anomalous experience of interacting with these realities, right? And so part of what we bring to the party is we bring different degrees of access to our subtle bodies and different subtle senses that are activated or get activated in the presence of these realities, and that then they bring, their own, ways of perceiving and communicating and interacting. And so for me, it's basically the course is like a 6-month-long CE5 event, right? And like everyone is welcome to the party. We're having people who have backgrounds in magic, people with backgrounds in theosophy, people who have backgrounds in ET, extra dimensional stuff, people have fairy backgrounds, right? So it's basically come with your practices. I'm going to be doing a set of practices that can serve as an anchor for the conversation. You can participate with those practices or not. You can just keep doing your own practices, but you can be part of a community that's, exploring this together. We can be comparing notes, and, the full range of anomalous experiences are going to be present, right? So that's it in a nutshell. And there's another book we're drawing on too, but you can see that on the website. It starts the week of May 23rd and goes basically through kind of mid-November. So yeah.
Very cool. Very cool.
Very
much looking forward to that. It's going to be amazing. Sean, this has been absolutely incredible. We are towards the end of our live streaming podcast today for our 150th event, and we're going to roll the celebration over here in a couple minutes. We're going to take a 5-minute break after the end of the podcast, and then on the Experiencer Group site, we're going to do a private Ask Me Anything with you, where we're going to hear some really wonderful details. Juicy details.
Juicy stuff.
So thank you to everybody in the chat today for coming out. Thank you for those of you that watch this in the future. And of course, thank you to Sean for participating in this event today, this kind of momentous event for us today with our 150th Experiencer Group event. So with that, Jonathan, you can join us anytime. We'd love to have you. So anybody, everybody, it's great to see you in the chat, and we look forward to seeing you in the near future for another episode of the Experiencer Group Roundtable podcast. And with that, we'll see you soon. And we're going to take a 5-minute break, and we're going to start our Ask Me Anything on the Experiencer Group site with Sean Esbjörn-Hargens.
Thank you, Sean.
Yeah,
See you in a minute.
I'll see you over there. Yeah.
All right. See you all soon.